All right. Well, I asked you, did anybody want me to skim through Mark, or do you like the way we're doing Mark?
We've got all year.
We can take a couple of years. The way we're moving. Actually, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, you know, Mark, I think Mark is jam-packed, and this is what I was telling you before, and I even gave you some examples today in the words. That, you know, Mark, I believe, is written for a Roman audience because it's simplified Greek, but the arguments are not simplified. They're very complex. They're very complex arguments, but in a package that's easy to read. And so, again, this is why, you know, if you look culturally or you look at, traditionally we think that Mark was written from Peter while Peter was in Rome, and Mark was in Rome with Peter. And so if that's true, then who would the audience naturally be?
Romans.
The Romans. So, and I think, you know, people have made a gross mischaracterization of Mark. Because what do you always hear about Mark? Mark is the simplest, right? But I disagree. I don't think Mark is simple. I think Mark is very complex. It's the language that is simple. It's as if I were in, let's say, Germany, and writing to Germans in English. And I would try to use a vocabulary that would fit within their capability, right? Or if I were writing for an audience of people that, you know, middle schoolers, let's say, I would try to limit my vocabulary and make my writing very, very distinct. But yet we see that every time we look at Mark, we find very, very complex ideas, which would appeal to the who? Well, to the Romans and to the Greeks, right? To the educated Romans and the Greeks. This is the way they expect literature to be written. And they would expect it to be this way. And there's another point I was going to make, too, about this specifically. It'll probably come to me. Anyway, yeah.
Can it be said that it can be read on different levels then? That you read it one way, kind of like some of the children's stories. You can read a children's story and they gather something from it, but if you dig down another level, there's another level that adults can...
No, I think it's the exact opposite. I think because of the way the Greeks understood things, that, as I said before, you know, when we read about, for example, the sower sowing, right? And that's what we're looking at, is the sower sowing. And the sower, according to Mark, the sower is sowing in the hodos, in the path, right? That's what, and when the Greeks hear that, they know they're talking about teen hodos, that being in the path is correct. However, what we did is, what did we do? We simplified it to make it euphemistic. Where in the Greek, we can't look for euphemisms. We need to absolutely look for concrete things. So, for example, last week we saw, it says, it doesn't say the rocky places, it says the rocky view. And so, to anyone reading that, they would go, anyone in the time reading that would go, the rocky view, the Temple Mount, right? You see what I'm saying? Anyone who says, it doesn't say depth, it doesn't say the seeds were not the right depth in the soil, it says they had no bathos. And to a Greek person, bathos is profundity, not depth. So, do you see what I'm saying? What we do is, we want to look at things how? In English.
The way we look at it.
Yeah, the way we look at it, but with lots of levels, right? Because that's what we're used to. We're looking at things with lots of levels. Where in Greek, it's not lots of levels. It's one level. It's one thing, period. Now in Hebrew, when we're looking at Hebrew, what do we do? Yeah, Hebrew has, you know, remember I told you Alf, A-L-F, that the first letter in Hebrew can mean oxen, it can mean 1,000, it can mean one, it can mean a friend. Take your pick. What's the context? In a lot of Psalms, what's the context? All of them. See? Because Hebrew is euphemistic. Hebrew is on lots of levels. English is on lots of levels. At least really good literature is, right? But in Greek, it's not. Greek is there. And we'll see that. Let's look at it today. I'll start with the words of the day. Let's see. Always got to check. I know one of these is really good. I have extra ones. I've been too lazy to get them. Let's see. I'll get my notes too. Luchnos. Luchnos. And matter of fact, you can almost guess what this is. It's not your lunch bag. It's like, and this is really interesting because Luke means light. Light, L-I-G-H-T. Light. And Luknos means from Lukos, from light, white, a portable lamp or luminaire. Literally, Luknos is a lampstand. But the other words I wanted to mention, that's why I put it in dark, is Luchnos, which means white or white light. K-L-I-N-E-N. Kynan. From, this means literally to recline. It's a couch. It's a couch, not for sleeping, but for eating. Although it can be for sleeping, but mostly it's for eating.
What do they consider white light? Is that the sun versus a candle? Would the sun be considered white light, or what is white light?
White could be the color.
Well,
Or is it meant to be a color white?
Phano is, remember, the brightness. And this is, again, the difference between Matthew and Mark. Remember I told you before that we see unique differences. And some of the unique differences we saw were the words for bridegroom, where nympheo, where the words that are very common in Latin and in Greek are used in Mark. Where in Matthew, it's words that are the less common Greek, but very common in Hebrew context. So like bridegroom is not nympheo, nympheos in Matthew, where it is in Mark. And likewise, Phano is what we saw a lot of in Matthew, which means brightness or illumination or shining. Where what we see is luchnos, which is more concrete, shining or white light.
Specific. White.
Yeah, something that's very specific. So, do you see this? And which would be simpler? Well, you know which is simpler, right? Luchnos. Because what is that? It's a lamp. It's a light. As opposed to Phano, which has a double implication or multiple implication.
But I guess a point I would think of a candlelight as being more yellow, and I was just wondering if they're making a difference between a pure light like coming from the spirit.
Well, keep that in mind.
radiating.
Well, remember, in Greek sense, Phano can be a spirit, could be a spirit light, right? Can Luknos? No. This is concrete. This has, the Greeks would say this is concrete. But this is what's used when it talks about Jesus. Remember, in Mark, it says that Jesus, Phano, he had brightness, he shined. Because they were talking about his, when he stood before people, it wasn't that he was literally shining, but rather that when he spoke, you know, it was his look, right? Like, you know, kind of like TV personalities try to be, right? So, you know, this, I'm not going to say this is a purely euphemistic, because it's not. But Greeks would say this is concrete in describing the way someone looks, or the way someone's expression is, or what they're saying. Because remember, the word Phano is the basis for Femi, to give my opinion. Right? Femi. Femi is one of those words for saying said, and Femi means to give your opinion. Just like, what's the one we love in Mark? Logos. To give a logical argument. That's what Jesus always says all the time. Climbing means, let's see, slanter slope means, this means literally to recline to eat. But you can, it's a couch. It's a couch. These are more Latin than you'd expect. But this, here's a Latin word for you. It's right in Mark. Modios, has a Greek declension, but it's modios. It means a measure of dry quantity. We translate it as a bushel. Which also shows something else. Okay, if that's a measure of dry quantity, what measure are they using? Roman, which means they're probably in Rome. If you were in Hebrew lands, if you're in Levant, what measure would you use? You do a Greek or a Hebrew measure, right? Probably a Greek measure. But if you're in Rome, use a Roman measure. I just thought that was kind of interesting. And of course, mysterion. Because we can't forget mysterion. As a matter of fact, last week, Jesus told them, 11, this is 4:11. He argued to them, he legoed them. The mysterion of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those outside, everything else is said in parabola. And remember, what's a mysterion? It's literally the silence in the initiation ceremony. But we translate this word as mystery, which is a totally incorrect translation. To be translated as mystery or secret is foolishness. Because mysterion is a type of religion in Greek thought. So you go from, remember the list? I guess I should drive the list just because. You start with, in the evolution of religion, because religion evolves, you start with animism. Yeah, animism. Animism is gods in everything. There's gods in trees, there's gods in rocks, there's gods in brooks, there's gods everywhere. You go to 2, what do you transition to? Pantheonic paganism. Pantheonic paganism. And what makes you do that? Anybody remember? What's the impetus to make you be a pantheonic pagan? Literacy. Yeah, literacy. Literacy. Because before literacy, I can't have a word for love. I can't have a word for anything that's not concrete. But when I become literate, I suddenly have words for things that I didn't have words for before. Like music, right? Or, well, music's not probably a good example, but love is a great example. Because you really can't love anything until you have a word for love. Because love is not concrete. You know, you have a word for sex. But how do you have a word for love? You know, love being a very non-concrete thing. You notice how the Greeks have a different word for everything? So, and we have a single word that means everything. Right? Which is a more advanced language by that criteria? No, English is a more advanced language because what we've done is quite incorrectly, I believe. We are euphemistic language, and so we made one word mean a lot of things. Where the Greeks, coming out of becoming just literate, what do you have? You have a word for each kind of love, right? Because that's the way you do it, as you're very concrete. Languages go from concrete to abstract. So when you start out very concrete, you just become literate. You begin getting this pantheonic paganism. What's the next step? Mysterion. Everybody goes to Mysterion. Mysterion is caused by the invention of philosophy. When I start to think about things, when I start to think about the world, I begin to realize that, hey, it's not a nympha, a nymphe, a nymph. It's not a dryad that's in the tree that's cursed me because I cut my tree, or I took some of the fruit, right? What caused the earthquake? It wasn't Zeus. It was natural phenomena. What caused fire? It's natural phenomena. As I begin to develop philosophy and science, by the way, I start to develop the idea that, hey, it's not the animism. It's not spirits and everything. It's not the gods that make things happen. It's the natural world. Because I begin to realize the natural world has these characteristics. Now, I'm not fully there because the 4th stage in is Gnosticism. And in Gnosticism is caused by the invention of science. Which, by the way, philosophy comes out of literacy, and science comes out of philosophy. And by the way, we are in a Gnostic world. We don't know if there's another stage beyond this. I'm not sure there is. Maybe post-internet. Maybe the internet will drive some level of some kind of new religious idea. But right now we're in Gnosticism, and people are basically driven by Gnosticism. Now, these are natural levels of religion that we find in people, in all peoples, which is very interesting. There's only two groups that buck this. I would call them non-religions, but you know what they are, right? Judaism and Christianity. Because although they share some characteristics of all these, they don't really fall into any of these categories, which is kind of interesting. So, in any case, let's look at.
Tanya, before you leave this,
Yeah.
if the movement from the gods causing things to happen one by one, who established the natural laws?
In philosophy, one of the big things that happens in philosophy is the philosophers, as the culture begins to travel and begins to experience other cultures, one of the things that really causes mysterion to come into being is that you go to, for example, what's his name? Hippolytus? The guy who went to Egypt and traveled quite a bit. The Greek author. I think it was Hippolytus. Anyway, when you start to travel, you go to Egypt and you find out that Egypt has a whole bunch of different
Ideas.
well, not different ideas,
Gods.
gods. Yeah, they do have different ideas, that's correct. Their culture is different, but they have a bunch of their gods. And you go, you have two choices then. What's your choice?
My God or their God?
You stick with your own,
Or you adapt with some of the others.
or you try to mix them. You try to mix them. Or you do what's very interesting. And this is, remember the Roman question? What was the Romans' question?
Does
Does it apply to us?
me in this place?
Yeah, does the Hebrew God apply to me? That's a Roman question. That's a question of all the ancient world. Because in the ancient world, it's mostly pantheonic paganism moving to Mysterion. Mysterion is usually monotheistic. But they're still asking. Here's something very interesting. If you go to Japan and you talk to an older person in Japan, you'll find that there are shrines everywhere. And every shrine has its own land kami, land god. Okay? And every shrine, the land kami, the land god for that shrine, controls a certain area. And one of the big questions that you have if you are a classic Japanese person is, if I go outside of my land kami's area, should I pray to that land kami? Or what do? I go to the shrine for that area, right? One of the big questions in Japan, and this is a really funny question, you know, Japanese celebrate Christmas. And so one of the questions they have is it okay for me to pray to a land kami, to a person who's a Christian? Will it do any good? Or is it okay for a Christian, like in the Catholic Church, right, to pray for a Japanese person under a land kami? Will it do any good?
Okay, that answered my question.
That's the same. Well, that's the same question, because the way that I get to begin to move into this idea of the way that it begins to move into the idea of Mysterion is when I begin to look at other groups or people, and then I begin to say, okay, there isn't Zeus who makes lightning. What makes lightning? And you say, well, I don't know exactly what makes lightning, but I know that lightning occurs in Egypt. So I either have to assume that Zeus has power over Egypt also, or I have to assume what? Zeus is the same as Osiris, or I have to assume that it's a natural phenomenon. And that's what philosophy gets into. Because as they begin to philosophize over these ideas, they begin to come to the conclusion that it's what? It's not the gods, it's not the spirits and things that make things happen. It's
Let me ask the direct question.
Yeah.
Do we as Christians believe that God established natural law?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Okay, so, I mean, whether we call God Jehovah or whether we call God Zeus, is it a logical extension, back to your example, that Zeus doesn't create lightning, but could Zeus have created the natural law? I don't care what his name is, but the supreme being established natural law. So why is there a transition between the two?
Because now you're talking, that's a Mysterion idea. The idea that the gods created, or God created, or a God created natural
So it's not
law.
a single event. He didn't decide on this day that he's gonna have lightning, but he established natural law that in these circumstances, lightning occurs. He didn't wake up and say, I'm gonna strike him with lightning. If the conditions were right, there's gonna be lightning.
Well, if you're a pantheonic pagan, or an animist, yes, you believe that. You believe that Zeus woke up today, or God, the God of Hebrews, this is Hebrew worldview, by the way, that God woke up today and said, I'm cursing you. Zach. Just like, remember, Peter's mother-in-law was cursed by Zeus. Literally, the word is cursed by Zeus. So she was cursed by Zeus. So God woke up, or Zeus woke up that day, or she did something that irritated Zeus. She stepped on his marble. Or if you go to the Hawaiian Islands, they say if you take away a single stone of the, whatever that honey lady things, volcano, you'll be cursed. Whoa, what about the molecules that stuck to your shoes? The minute I began to develop philosophy, and by the way, in philosophy, they developed the ideas of the atoms and miniature particles and molecules, not quite molecules, but you know what I'm saying. The minute you begin to develop these ideas and thoughts, then it no longer becomes that, hey, God woke up today and wanted to curse me. It's rather, there's the idea of the natural thing. Now, there's the other question that, by the way, is not a Christian thought, that God does anything wrong or evil, or God curses. Yeah.
On the Mysterion, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly something you've said in the past, that we're calling this religions, but weren't these sort of cults and I think you mentioned Pythagoras as one, that their mystery or their secret, if you will, was, for instance, the Pythagorean theorem, that it was almost like a cult of knowledge as opposed to a cult of spiritualism or, what we would conventionally think of religion.
Yeah, your description is good, but and to us, the Masons are a direct Mysterion. There are groups in cults and groups that are direct Mysterions today. You can see examples of them. Usually, by definition, if they have rites that are done in secret, if the way to become a member is a rite that's done in secret, and then you usually have levels within that secret group or society, we don't usually like to call them religions today. Why?
That would give them tax exempts.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, that's good. That's a good answer. The IRS, that's what we after. Our founding fathers, a lot of them were Masons. And there may be people that are Masons, and Masons aren't necessarily, we don't consider them religious fanatics, right? The thing is that today, or even in the earlier eras of our country, people didn't necessarily view these as religions, but they are, by definition, religions. Okay? Whether you like them or not. Now, does that mean that the Elks necessarily are religion? Well, maybe not. Depends on what they do in their meetings and what their adjuncts are. And it's true also that lots of religions can turn into non-religions. Like, for example, there's a lot of Jewish people in this country that are, there's a lot of Christians in this country that are what? Easter and Christmas Christians, right? Are they really Christians? Well, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm not judging it. But I'm just saying, you can make any religion into a social group, right? So you can make any social group into a religion. Take your pick. So, I think that there is okay. In a Greek worldview, is this a religion? Seriously, yeah, but it's Greek. In an English-speaking or a modern English worldview, is this a religion? No. Who knows? No, who knows? Because it could be or it may not be. Is this a religion? In a Greek worldview, yeah, it's a big-time religion. In a modern worldview, this is just secularism, right? Atheists are Gnostics, and they say they don't believe in God. Okay? You see what I'm saying? So, but a lot of this is what? What is it that's driving this in our thoughts? It's our culture, right? In our culture, things can be religion and non-religious at the same time, right? But in a Greek culture, no way, right? In a Greek culture, if you're in Athens and you're not following the pantheonic paganism and the festivals, what's going to happen to you? You're toast.
But aren't we all of them searching for cause? What causes something?
Oh yes, that's a great that's just a great observation. That in every case they're looking for cause. Cause here is spirits and everything. Cause here are the gods. Cause here is the mysteries of the gods, the natural world, right? That they try to encapsulate in the Pythagorean theorem or in the circle pi. Pi Day was just Friday, by the way. And Gnostics are what? What do Gnostics say drive the world?
Science.
Knowledge or science. Yeah, empiricism. These are religions. No matter how hard they try to say they're not religions, these are religions. Okay?
So if you have a mysterion where the mystery has been solved and the answer has been given, do you really have a mysterion anymore?
Well, see, that's the thing. In a mysterion, when you reach the 40th level of Pythagorean, you know the mystery. That's the thing that's amazing about the mysterion of Christ, right? What's the mysterion of Christ? Christ is dead, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. And what do I do? The minute you walk in, I tell you, this is the mystery of Christ. That's why Christianity looks like a mysterion to the Greeks, but it isn't a mysterion. Because I just told it to you, right? So if I just told it to you, you don't have to wait for 40 years until you reach the 40th level of Christianity before I tell you what the mystery is.
So the mysterion for the Judaism is that there is a Savior coming?
That is an interesting observation because that is kind of true. But Judaism is really not viewed as a mysterion, has not really ever been viewed as a mysterion. And I haven't really looked at it that way. Christianity, big time, is looked at as a mysterion. And really, Judaism could be looked at as a mysterion, especially with the a Messiah coming.
So the Greeks were more fascinated with Christianity, the Tenodos, than they really were with Judaism?
Yeah, Judaism had problems for them, because, and I've been through this before, but I don't mind going back because I think these are important ideas. In Judaism, what does it promise? If you get circumcised, you're circumcised, you're a guy, right? And you get convinced, and you go through all this training, which takes years, right? You have to learn, you have to memorize the Torah. So you memorize all this stuff, and then you get whacked, right? And hopefully you survive being whacked. And then you go through the mikveh, and now you have the opportunity to make sacrifices, right? Except there's 36 things your sacrifices won't do for you, and if you're Greek living in Greece, you can't do most of them. You're kind of up a creek, right? And then,
very attractive.
yeah, and then it promises, what does Judaism promise? When you die, if you're Orthodox, when you die, you go to Sheol. So I don't have much opportunity, at least in Greek worldview, I go to Elysian fields, maybe, if I'm good enough, right? So the biggest draw for Judaism to the Greeks was what, do you think? What was the big draw?
The history.
The history and learning. Yeah, to the Greeks, the fact that they could learn, because if you remember in the Maccabees, it's just not the Maccabees. There are Greek writers who wrote about the Hebrews' knowledge and their history. And the fact that their Old Testament went back, 2,000 years, or not quite that many then, about 1,400 years, right, at that period. So that their Old Testament, covered such periods, and that they would be able to read it and know it. You see, that really excited the Greeks, because the Greeks were into philosophy. And they saw that as a basis for knowledge and philosophy and that history. So, yeah, that's what drew the Greeks. The thing that really excited them, though, is when Christianity came about, and Christianity looked like a mysterion, it had all the trappings of mysterion. It had baptism, it had repentance, it had a supper with the deity, it had a renaming, it had a reclothing with the deity, it had closeness with a deity, it had a monotheistic deity that promised something, it had a deity that died and rose, which is unique until Christianity. It had a bunch of really cool stuff that and it had Hebrew. It had the Judaic ideas behind it. So when the Greeks saw that, and the other thing that they could do is, what did they get to read? If you were a Christian, Teen Hodos guy.
The Torah and
Well, what could you read instead of the Torah in Hebrew?
LXX.
LXX. Yeah. You were legal to read LXX. Because LXX could be read for study, but it couldn't be read in the synagogues, right? So, pretty cool. So, talk about the advantages you got. And the fact that you had, the fact that you were tied to this group, we think, because to us, books are ubiquitous, right? Everybody's carrying around their Old Testament, New Testament, in their consolidated compendium. In the ancient world, how hard was it to find something? The cost of a scroll. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I reminded this. The cost of a scroll is a 40-acre farm. That's the average scroll. Okay? So the average library had 7 books in it. 7. So your access to books was really low. So the minute you tied up with Teen Hodos or a synagogue, guess what you had access to? Library, books, all kinds of great scrolls and stuff you could read. This really appealed to these people. To us, we just want a television and your iPad, right? But in the ancient world, to be able to read books, to be able to have all this, and by the way, mysterions. What are the mysterions most known for? You may have forgotten, but you can't be totally forgetful of this. What did they have in Europe all the time? They even have some in the United States. Every year, Omer Ammergau,
Passion.
that are called what?
Oh, festivals?
Mystery plays. Mystery plays. The word mystery that's used comes directly from the Greek mysterion, becomes the word in Latin for mystery, becomes the word used for the plays, the mystery plays. That's what they're called, as mystery plays. Okay, I know we renamed it the Passion Play, but they're called mystery plays. Why are they called mystery plays? Where did they come from? The Greeks, every year, did a religious play. This is why it's amazing hypocrisy in your schools that whenever they teach the Greek plays to children, do you know every Greek play is a religious play? Because they were chosen by the priests. They chose every other year either a comedy or a tragedy to be presented at the religious festival for Athens. And by the way, they chose a comedy and a tragedy presented every year at the Olympics. They were religious plays. They were viewed as religious. And so guess what the Christians did in the 1st century as they came out of Judaism? Actually, it's not the 1st century, it's about the 3rd century. As they came out of Judaism, what did they develop? Mystery plays. Mystery plays. To show the mysteries, right? And by the way, who did the simple mystery plays for the people? Famous guy who did serious mystery plays at Christmas. They'd never done mystery plays at Christmas until this guy. Huh? Who was the first guy to do a crèche? Living crèche. St. Francis of Assisi. One of the big things that St. Francis of Assisi did is all the mystery plays, they charged you money to go to a mystery play. So the mystery plays started out kind of as a people's kind of thing and became, because in the Greek world, you paid a drachma. You paid a day's wages usually to go to a mystery play. And so this was kept. But the problem is, people who couldn't afford to spend a drachma, and because the mystery plays, although they were viewed as religious, were not viewed as a requirement of the religion, right? So who went to the mystery plays? People who were wealthy and had money. St. Francis of Assisi said, I want to make mystery plays available to the common people. And therefore he did the crèche. And that's what he did at Christmas, is he had a live crèche with Mary and Joseph, and he was showing the gospel through it. And that's what he was famous for, because he brought the gospel to the people.
I was thinking in medieval times there were kind of a morality plays that were Christian gospels set into, that's an evolution of that same idea.
Well, those are mystery plays.
Okay.
In fact, they were even called mystery plays until, I expect if you look back, you'll find they're called mystery plays until the turn of the 20th century. They only started calling them different things because, why? We lost the meaning of the word. That's the problem in English, or in English. Okay, church. Church comes from Christus, which comes from Lord Mithras, right? Or church comes from, not Christus. It comes from Lord Mithras, which is not Christus. It's Kyrios means Lord. And church, the word church comes from Kyrios, which came into Latin, but it came from the Greek, because why? What did they do? Well, I want to get there. We'll see what they did. Anyway, 12. This is 4:12. So that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding, they might be turned and be forgiven for a hamartia of their misser mark. And Jesus legoed them. Don't you understand? This is 13. Jesus legoed them, argued to them. Don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parable? If you can't understand this, because in Jesus' mind, the previous parable, the story we did last week, it was obvious. Now remember what I told you. In Greek is always logos to a telos. Always logos to a telos. So therefore, is Jesus ever going to tell them the telos? Never. So that's why, we read these and we say, hey, Jesus explained this, but he never told us the answer. By the way, what is the telos of the parable of the sower? Stay in teen hodos. Stay in the path. That's right. Stay in teen hodos. Because remember, it's mistranslated, I believe intentionally mistranslated to make it look like a parable. But it literally says that the sower sowed alongside the path, out of the path. The seeds that were outside of the path were the ones that were on bad soil. The stuff that is in the path is what is on good soil. All right, we'll go any further. Let's look. It says, this is a constant theme in Mark. Because, and I can't go into great detail. I'll just remind you. Jesus is what kind of thinker? He's a Greek thinker. Where the disciples are what kind of thinkers? They're Hebrew thinkers. This is the problem. This is what Jesus is trying to teach them. We think Jesus is trying to teach them all about the kingdom of heaven. Well, he is. But really what he's trying to teach them is how to think Greek. He's trying to teach them how to think Greek. That's why he keeps saying, look, you dummies, you don't understand this parable. You don't understand anything. He constantly tells them this. There is a turning point, however. And we'll see the turning point when we get there in 8:20, I believe. Anyway, 14. The farmer sows the word. Literally, the farmer sows the logos, the argument. I really hate it that we translated this word because it's not word. The farmer sows the logos. And remember this is important is because the logos in LXX, remember in LXX in Genesis, the very first of Genesis says, and Elohim, and by the way that's translated theos, in the beginning was theos. And theos, the spirit, the ruach, which translated into the Greek is the pneuma. The pneuma was over the waters. And God logos. In Hebrew it's amar. But in the Septuagint it's in God logos. God did what to create the world? He made a logical argument. A logical argument created the world. That's in the Septuagint. And so that is what Jesus is talking about. When he says word, when he says logos, when he's talking generically about logos, the logos is the logical argument, which, by the way, Jesus is telling them. Remember he said in 11, he argued to them, he legoed to them, the mysterion of the kingdom of God has been given to you. Where was it given to you? He is still trying to explain the kingdom of God to them, expanding on this argument. But that's what he's saying. When Jesus says, the farmer sows the logos. And it doesn't say farmer, by the way. It says the sower sows the logos. Just to be clear. Remember I told you last week we wondered why the farmer was sowing in the path? He's not a farmer, he's a sower. So, just to be clear. And that's kind of a joke, okay? That's not meant to be, don't take that as some kind of serious thing. The point is, though, that Jesus did not say it was a farmer that was farming. It's a sower who is sowing. And I think that is an important note. Okay, some people are like seed in 15. Some people are seed out of, not along, not along. The word is, did I get the word? I don't think I put the word. The word is not along. It's a word, it's the
Here.
huh?
Near, para.
Is it para in the, is
Right,
that
that's
in
what
your
we're
inner
doing.
layer? It's para, yeah. The seed near the path. Some people are like seed near the path, out of. Literally, one of the ways this preposition can be translated is out of. Out of, it's near the path, near the hodos. Remember, all of Mark is about the hodos. Why is Mark about the hodos? What do they call themselves? Teen hodos. And you know they call themselves this until about the 2nd century. No Christian called himself Christian. Who called them Christians? The Greeks called them Christians. Because it looks like a mysterion. Because mysterions always name themselves after their leader or God. And so the leader and God of Christianity, or teen hodos, is Christ. So they call themselves Christians. Or they didn't call themselves Christians. The Greeks called them Christians. They call themselves teen hodos. So the problem with the English is we translate hodos as path and road and roadway and way and all kinds of things. It's not. It's hodos. Whenever Mark's saying this, he's directly talking about teen hodos. So in any case, some people like seed near, out of the path, hodos, where the logos, where the logical argument, the word, the logical argument is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satanas comes and takes away the word that was sown in them, in their cardia, in their seat of suke. The seat of suke. Now remember, it wasn't birds, it was the messengers of the gods. Remember? They came and took it. 16. Others, like the seed sown on near, it's not rocky places, the rocky view. Hear the argument, and at once receive it with chara. Why do they receive it with chara? Same reason last week. Who are these guys? Who are the people on the Temple Mount? On the rocky view? The view of the rock. The priests. Why do they receive it with joy?
Thought it might be the Messiah.
Yeah, it could be the Messiah in this generation, right? They receive it with joy. 17, and this is where we stopped last week, but since they have no root, literally, let's see, what is that thing? We already talked about that, but since they have no bathos, they have no depth, no profundity in the Greek. Remember, depth in English can be either depth mentally or depth physically. In the Greek, profundity or bathos means profundity. It doesn't mean depth in that sense. When thlipsis, pressure or persecution, diogemos, to be persecuted, pursued, comes because of the argument, they quickly fall away. Literally, it's scandalizo. They are entrapped. They don't understand the logos. Their thinking is wrong. Their thinking is wrong. Remember, Jesus is a Greek thinker. He's trying to show them how to think Greek, right? They're thinking in Hebrew, in a Hebrew cultural sense. What he's trying to say is, they hear it, but they don't what? They don't understand it. They don't internalize it. So their thinking is wrong. They can't explain why they were convinced in the first place. 18. Still others, like the seed sown among the thorns. Remember we talked about the thorns of the Romans. But the worries, literally the merriment, the solitude of this life, of this age, the deceitfulness, apathy, the delusion of plutos, of wealth, of stuff, and the desires, the epithumia, the scent of the sacrifice for other things comes in and chokes the word, the logos, making it akapos, not pluckable. So there's no fruit. You can't pluck it. But what's really cool about this is look at what it says. The delusion. Number one, it says the merimna, the solicitude. The solicitude of this aeon, of this age. The deceitfulness, the delusion of stuff, of having things. Because the Romans and the Greeks had things, right? That they were striving for. And the epithumia, the scent of the sacrifice. Epithumia is my favorite word in Greek. Because epithumia, we mistranslate it as desire. It's not. It's more like Lust, like German Lust. We translate it as a desire, a negative desire, like lust. But it's not like negative desire. It can be a very positive desire. In German, Lust means I have a desire for something. I want something. In Greek, epithumia literally means the smell of the sacrifice. Because remember, you only got to eat meat once a year or so, or at the festivals. At least in Hebrew, you got to eat meat about 6 times a year. In Greek, you got to eat meat, if you're Athenian, you got to eat meat about 12 times a year. Because that's when the main sacrificial festivals were held. So if you had enough money in your pocket to be able to buy some meat, you could eat meat then. But every time they started cooking that meat, what did you do?
Smell it first.
You smelled it. And just think if you haven't had a steak for a whole year, you know, you'd be salivating. That's what, remember I told you, when the kids went to the marketplace, they weren't begging their parents for stuff. They were begging their parents for meat. They smelled the meat cooking in the marketplace, right outside the sacrificial areas of the temples. They said, oh, Mom, Dad, meat. Buy me some meat, you know. In any case, the epithumia. So it's not just the desires for things. What is it the desire for? What is epithumia? A desire for not just meat.
Something you can't have. Something that's special.
Something that's special and something that's tied to religion. In other words, it's not just the wealth they desire. What do people desire? They want to be right with God. They want to be right in the world, right? And that's what this represents. That's why I kind of get irritated by our translators, because the sense of the sacrifice has such deep meaning. A drive of desire for food, but a drive of desire for rightness with gods. Right? You want to be right with the gods, with God. In any case, and that's what chokes them, is that desire that's not fulfilled. And that was the Romans, of course. And then 20. Others, like seed sown on good soil, on literally gay, good gay. The gay, that was the word of the day last week, gay, meaning the solid physical part of the earth. This was a thing that was negative to Matthew, but you notice to Mark it's completely positive. Others sown on good gay. Hear the argument. And paradichomai, near receive. Paradichomai. Paradichomai. Near receive. Near receiving. What's really neat about this word is Paul uses the term lambano, which means to take, where Jesus in Mark says paradichomai, to near receive. And produce a crop 30, 60, etc. times with soul. But you notice, Jesus did not give them a telos. What's the telos? What's the obvious telos of this? Same lesson, stay in the path. Stay in the hodos, right? Because if you're in the hodos, you're in the good soil. Yeah.
What's interesting is when he gets down to finally the seeds that fall on the path, he doesn't use the word hodos, though.
Where's that?
Well, it just says that it falls on good soil.
Yeah, because...
Why wouldn't he say that the the seeds that fall on the hodos.
What Jesus is trying to do here, and what I think Mark's trying to do ultimately, is he's giving you a logical argument. And the logical argument is, who is supposed to figure out this argument, this logic?
People listening and the disciples.
Exactly. And so, if I told you at the end, the good soil is the hodos, what did I just do?
Give away the
I told you the telos. And Jesus and Mark, as good Greek writers, are not going to do that. Because the point isn't to do that. The point is for you to get to the end and go, beep. See? Have that aha moment. That's why it's very critical that the way the translation of that preposition, and it's not translated right. There's no way that I can translate when I sow near the todos to mean I'm sowing in the hodos. Yeah.
If we translate it the road or a beaten path, the beaten path does not necessarily imply good soil.
Well,
It's
yeah.
difficult to produce a crop on a beaten soil,
Well, and remember,
compacted.
we're going back. Remember, Mark is a total logos to tell us. So what's the first thing we knew about Mark? What's the first thing that happened to Mark? John the Baptist was doing what? Preparing the hodos. Preparing the hodos. So all through Mark, what is the logos and the telos we're getting? The way, the way, the way. Remember, the way was mentioned almost in every single passage, every single argument. We didn't get the way. The odd part is we didn't get the way in that last part about the blasphemy and stuff like that. I'm going to get to this next one because we got to get to this next one. 21, he said to them, do you bring a luknos, a lamp, to put it under a modios, a bushel basket? Or it's not a bed, it's a kleinen. A place where you eat. This is very important. Instead, don't you put it on its stand, on a lampstand? Why did he use these words? Because this is just like Matthew. Who put lights under bushels?
Mysterions.
The mysterion, the mithrin mysterion. What they did is, and you didn't put it under a bowl. You put it under a bowl, your light's going to burn out, right? Because there's no oxygen. You put it under a bushel basket, under a bushel, because then, and notice, in Matthew, it was not a modion or a modios. It was the Greek equivalent. But in Mark, it's the Latin word. Because in Rome, what did they have? They had the Mithrin rituals. And where were they doing them? Underground. This is where all the churches started. That's why kurios became the word for church, because the Mithrin ritual was done underground, and the Christians infiltrated the Mithrins. One of the main things about the Mithrins is the Mithrins would take a light, a lamp, and they would put it under a bushel. And they would go down into the Mithrin cave, and then at the proper point in the ritual, they would reveal their light. And this represented to the Greeks what? The illumination of the idea of the mystery, of the Mithrin. The Mithrin mystery was light. And so actually we don't exactly know what the Mithrin mystery was. We assume it was light. But they went and they uncovered the bushel basket, and guess what they did next? They had a deific meal. And when they had their deific meal, where did they put their lamp? Yeah, we're not sure if they put it exactly right under the couch, because that might cause a little problem for heat and burning. The couches are pretty high off the ground. But when they ate, they reclined. And so that when they ate their deific meal, the light, we don't know exactly where they put it, but we know they put it someplace. But you notice what Jesus said? Don't put it under the couch that you're eating on. You're reclining. This is for the deific meal. Very interesting. Mithrin. Beautiful Mithrin imagery. Instead, you put it on a stand. Now, this is also representative, because where are the lampstands? What are the famous lampstands? In the temple. Where in the temple? Huh?
The menorah.
Well, there's a menorah, but there are the more famous lampstands than that.
In Holy of Holies.
Yeah. In the Holy of Holies, there are 4 lampstands, and this is the thing that where the incense is burned and where the lamps are lit. And this is what's kept lit every day, right? And this is where the blood is placed, right? Pretty cool imagery that Jesus is using here. Very simple, very easy thing. But obviously, this is a statement against whom? Against the Mysterion, right? Against the Mithrin Mysterion. 22, for whatever is kryptos, is covered over, is meant to be disclosed. Phanero. The light shone on it. Phanero means to have the light shine on it. So you notice, Jesus uses, okay, if I use luknos in one term, I'm meaning what? Concrete lamps. If I use phanero in the next, what am I implying?
Illuminated.
Well, illumination, but okay, now that's a theological thing, so be careful of that. But see, I'm saying that it's light on. I'm shining as opposed to a lamp itself. So in one you could say he's obviously talking about the Mithrins, right, in the Mysterion, and the next he's talking about light, either literal light or intellectual light. For whatever sin is kryptos is meant to be disclosed, literally have the light shown on, and whatever is apokryptos, secreted away, apokryptos, remember, that's apocrypha, is meant to be brought out into the phaneros, literally illuminated or brought to light. You notice that in every case, these words, if you look at the words, it is so evident what is happening here and how Jesus is taking concrete Greek words and turning them into ideas or thoughts. And I'll finalize this. 23. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Because what was the first thing that he told us before this set of parables? Those who have ears to hear, listen. Akeo, listen. And then it goes on. What we'll do is we'll continue from here. Great questions today. Like I said, whenever you open any of these, you open these culturally, it's like a Pandora's box. There's so much information, so much stuff. That's why I tell you that Mark may be written in a simplified kind of Greek, but it's obvious that the arguments that are in Mark are very complex arguments. We thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.